Human decision-making has long been imagined as a rational, calculated process, governed by logic, evidence, and probability. Classical economic models, for instance, assumed the existence of a rational agent, a so-called Homo economicus, who weighs costs and benefits to reach optimal outcomes. Yet mounting psychological and neuroscientific evidence over the past decades has decisively overturned this assumption. Emotions are not merely peripheral or disruptive influences on our decisions. Rather, they are deeply integrated into how we evaluate options, assess risk, recall relevant memories, and ultimately choose how to act. Emotions are not the enemy of reason, they are its indispensable partner. To understand how emotions influence decision making, we must first recognize what emotions are. Emotions are complex, adaptive responses to internal or external stimuli involving physiological arousal, subjective experience, expressive behavior, and cognitive appraisal. They evolve to help organisms respond quickly to threats and opportunities in the environment. Fear prompts avoidance. Anger prepares for confrontation. Joy facilitates social bonding. These emotional systems operate rapidly and often outside of conscious awareness, enabling efficient and often life-saving judgments long before deliberative reasoning has a chance to engage. One of the most influential contributions to this field came from Antonio Damasio, whose research on patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex revealed profound impairments in decision-making despite intact intellectual abilities. These patients could reason logically about hypothetical scenarios, yet failed to make advantageous choices in real-life contexts. Damasio, 1994, proposed the somatic marker hypothesis, that emotional signals, somatic markers, guide decision-making by attaching affective value to possible outcomes. These bodily-based markers help narrow the field of choices and bias attention toward beneficial options, especially in complex or uncertain situations. Far from impairing reason, emotions serve as shortcuts for experience-based judgment. Further empirical support comes from research on effective forecasting and the role of anticipated emotions. People do not merely make decisions based on current emotions, but also based on how they expect to feel in the future. For instance, individuals might avoid risky investments not because the loss is likely, but because the anticipated regret of losing money looms large. Emotions such as regret, disappointment, pride, or relief become central motivators in choice architecture. Yet, as Gilbert and Wilson, 2000, have shown, people are notoriously inaccurate in predicting the intensity and duration of future emotional states, often overestimating both. This miscalibration can lead to suboptimal decisions, such as avoiding beneficial risks or overcommitting to choices that yield fleeting joy. Emotions also exert powerful influence through the mechanism of framing. The same information can lead to different decisions depending on how it is emotionally presented. Consider the classic experiment by Tversky and Kahneman, 1981, in which participants were asked to choose between two medical treatments for a deadly disease. When outcomes were framed in terms of lives saved, people preferred a conservative option. When framed in terms of deaths, they chose a riskier alternative. The content was logically equivalent, but the emotional salience of loss versus gain shifted preferences. This phenomenon, known as the framing effect, reveals that emotions triggered by presentation, not content, can override rational evaluation. Affective states can also color the content and accessibility of memory. In a state of anxiety, for example, people are more likely to recall negative information and overestimate risk. In a positive mood, they may become more creative, optimistic, and willing to take chances. These mood-congruent biases influence the selection and weighting of evidence during decision-making. Moreover, emotional arousal can influence attention and narrow cognitive scope. Under high stress, individuals may focus more narrowly on immediate threats, neglecting long-term consequences or alternative perspectives. This has important implications for decision-making in crisis situations, such as in emergency medicine, law enforcement, or military operations. Real-world applications of these principles are manifold. In marketing, emotions are strategically harnessed to drive consumer behavior. Advertisements that evoke nostalgia, desire, fear, or joy are more persuasive than those based solely on information. Political campaigns leverage fear appeals or moral outrage to mobilize voters. In the justice system, jurors' emotional reactions to a defendant or victim can subtly influence verdicts, despite instructions to remain impartial. Even in medical contexts, how a doctor communicates a diagnosis, compassionately or coldly, can shape the patient's choices regarding treatment. Reflecting on personal experience, one might recognize how emotionally charged moments have shaped life-altering decisions. Accepting a job out of excitement, ending a relationship due to resentment, moving cities based on a sense of longing or restlessness. Emotions not only affect what we choose, but how we justify it afterward. Post-decision emotions such as satisfaction or regret often lead to reappraisal, learning, or behavioral adjustment. In this way, emotions contribute not only to the moment of decision, but also to the feedback loops that regulate future choices. Yet emotions can also mislead. Anger may lead to impulsivity and misjudgment. Anxiety may paralyze action or inflate perceived risk. Sadness can reduce motivation and lead to overly pessimistic outlooks. Emotional hijacking, a term popularized by Goleman, 1995, describes situations in which intense affect overwhelms cognitive control, leading to rash or regrettable behavior. Thus, while emotions are essential to good decision-making, emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, regulate, and reflect on one's emotions, is equally crucial. It is this capacity that allows individuals to integrate emotional signals without being dominated by them. Neuroscience has further refined our understanding of how emotions shape decisions. The amygdala, for instance, is critical in processing emotional salience, particularly fear and threat. The orbitofrontal cortex evaluates reward and punishment, integrating emotional and sensory input to guide choices. The anterior cingulate cortex monitors conflict and errors, alerting the brain to discrepancies between expected and actual outcomes. These structures form a dynamic network that connects affective, cognitive, and behavioral systems, ensuring that emotion and reason are not isolated faculties, but deeply interwoven in decision-making. From a developmental perspective, emotions begin shaping decision-making patterns in childhood. Young children learn what is safe, dangerous, desirable, or forbidden through emotional feedback, parental praise, disapproval, or expressions of fear. Over time, these emotional cues are internalized and become part of the child's moral compass and decision heuristics. In adolescence, the emotional brain matures more rapidly than the prefrontal cortex, leading to a temporary imbalance that explains the heightened emotional reactivity and risk-taking characteristic of this life stage. Casey, Jones, and Hare, 2008. Understanding this developmental trajectory is essential for designing effective interventions in education, youth counseling, and juvenile justice. Reflecting on the psychology of decision-making in light of emotional processes invites profound philosophical and ethical questions. To what extent can we be held accountable for choices made under emotional duress? Should courts consider emotional states in sentencing? Can algorithms ever replicate the subtle and context-sensitive role of human emotion in decision-making? What does it mean to make a good decision, one based on logic, or one informed by deeply felt values? In conclusion, emotions are not irrational forces to be suppressed, but essential components of human judgment. They help us prioritize, assign value, anticipate consequences, and learn from experience. When integrated with reflection and awareness, emotions enhance the depth, richness, and wisdom of our choices. The challenge is not to eliminate emotion from decision-making, but to cultivate the discernment to know when and how it is guiding us, and whether that guidance aligns with our deeper goals and values.